came over to Georgia Southern to take some classes and then loved it, fell in love with Georgia Southern, met some professors.
It's a fine school.
It is. You know, it was just the right size at that time for me. I probably didn't need to go from Sylvania to the throes of UGA.
Yeah.
And so it was a good place for me to grow and be nurtured a little, and so I had a great time there. Joined fraternities and did homecoming court, and ran through the campus like wild, like all the rest of us.
Yeah, we all did that.
Yes, that's right.
I'm gonna ask a couple, 3 questions.
Sure.
I got another meeting that's going down the hall. We're running a little bit late for this one, so anyway, tell me what you see are the main issues that are important to you and in your view to our state of Georgia, and which you would like to deal with if you should get elected.
Well, it would be a privilege to serve in the 116th Congress of the United States as a representative of my neighbors, all 719,940 of them that live in this district. I think many of them feel that they don't have a voice in Washington right now to represent rural America. There's something unique about being from rural America.
Right.
There's a cooperative spirit that I think is lacking in Washington, D.C. Because when you're in rural America, you count on your neighbors, and your neighbors grow to count on you. We never put a crop in the ground without expecting our neighbors would help get it out. Our neighbors could trust that we'd bring their animals back to them, and they would bring ours back as well. There was a cooperative spirit I think is lacking in Washington. They think their voice is not being heard because too much of what goes on in Washington is good for some, but not for the very many. And I say the corporate interest of this country, as opposed to just working, ordinary, average Americans. And they think they've missed the recovery, and largely empirical evidence suggests that they have. They know that even though the president says that things are as good as they've ever been, if you ever walk down the main street of Millen or Swainsboro or even Statesboro, you'll see otherwise. Sylvania is a shadow of itself.
Yeah.
50 years ago, you could have a baby in Millen, Sylvania, Waynesboro, and none of those places you can have a baby now. Matter of fact, most of them are struggling to keep their hospitals open.
Yeah.
We are 45th in the nation in terms of workforce readiness. We are 50th in the nation in terms of infant mortality. We have 12 out of the 19 counties where there's so many people in poverty that every child in the public school gets free lunch. This is unacceptable.
Yeah.
We have 50 rural hospitals, and only 10 of them are financially viable right now. And every hospital
In your district.
Across Georgia.
Okay.
You asked me about Georgia.
What I did.
But when you look specifically at this district, we've already had a loss of a hospital up in Montgomery, Wheeler area, and that just exacerbates the hospitals that are available. And of course, Metters Hospital is on a 3-week operating cushion. Claxton's Hospital is down to a week. They are in, I'm not sure if it's an ongoing viable operation right now, to tell you the truth. And that's the state of affairs in a lot of places.
Yeah.
We can do better. It's not a matter of money, it's a matter of organizing our priorities. I think right now we have people in charge who are day traders, not long-term investors.
Yeah.
Day traders who are there to get what they can get for right now for themselves, rather than people who understand how critical it is to invest in America for the long haul. When you invest in America, when you invest in rural America, it's good for all of us.
You're right about that. You're right about that.
That investment in before meant the electrification of rural Georgia. The marketplace would have never done that. We invested in rural America and built bridges and roads and schools that we can hardly keep open now, keep in repair right now. In this district, the 12th district, there are 40 bridges that are structurally deficient or rated poor according to the United States Department of Transportation. Those aren't red bridges or blue bridges. Those are bridges that all of our families have to go across.
40 bridges.
40 bridges.
In your district.
It's your district as well.
Yeah, I know you.
And those are things, when my opponent ran for Congress 4 years ago, he said he was running for one reason, because the sitting congressman wasn't getting the job done. And I can tell you the number of structurally deficient bridges has increased over the last 4 years. It hasn't decreased. I thought if we sent a bill to Congress, and maybe if we sent one to the White House, we'd get an infrastructure bill. We hadn't gotten one though, not in the tenure of this administration.
Well, in
or
order to
Republican.
fix those bridges, is that a federal problem or a state problem?
It's a combination of all of them.
Yeah,
A combination of all of them.
so some money would have to come from the federal government to be added to what the state had.
That's right.
Repair them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of organizing our priorities.
Tell me about our debt situation. I, like you, I'm sure, concerned about the huge amount of federal debt that we have. Over 100 trillion. Nobody knows what the exact number is. It's so big. But unfunded obligation like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, scholarships, and so forth.
Sure.
In addition to the $22 trillion worth of printed bonds and notes and that sort of thing.
Sure.
Talk to me about that a little bit, because some of the things that you're pointing out are needs, and needs have to be funded one way or the other. Talk to me about all that and how you see that the debt problem and what we should do about that.
Absolutely. You know, our children and their children will have some very tough questions to ask us about our stewardship.
That's right.
They will. We are saddling them with a debt that they'll have to pay off. And for what? When I look at the $1.5 trillion tax bill, my opponent says it's a boon for the economy. I say that it is a burden to working Americans. What do we get for it? We gave folks who were already taking in record profits in corporations. Corporate profits are at an all-time high. The stock market is at an all-time high.
That's right.
Worker productivity is at an all-time high.
That's right.
If ever there was a time to chip in a little bit more to get America back on its feet, this was the time to make the investment. But instead, we gave a rebate. Instead of doing what we did during the Franklin Delano Roosevelt era, when we were in extraordinary times then as well, that was the time to put down payments on the 21st century education, to make sure that our infrastructure, which across this nation is rated C-, was repaired. You travel abroad, and I'm fascinated with the airports, the roads, the bridges, and other places, and we come back here and we can't even maintain a cell phone call from county to county.
Yeah.
We gave away $1.5 trillion and didn't do a lot of investment. Families know what that means.
My question to you though is, how are we gonna deal with
Sure.
it now? Because it's on the books.
That's right.
And it's, you know, the obligation is there,
Sure.
and the printed debt is there. So
Sure.
What do you, I mean, how would you, if you get to Congress, what are you gonna suggest we do with the national debt?
Right. Well, we got to stop growing it for one thing and pass a balanced budget amendment.
That's good.
Now, my opponent, he and those who are often Republicans talk about cutting the deficit as long as they're out of power. But once they get into power, the record is replete for the last 40 years that they have a record of deficit spending. And this deficit has increased during the first 2 years of this administration at a faster rate than the 3 previous administrations combined. I mean, we are spending money like it's nobody's business.
Money we don't have.
Money we don't have. That's right, just charging it to the credit card. And it's not as if we're fighting a war. We've been engaged in a war for 18 years, so that's not an extraordinary burden that we didn't have before during the previous administrations. We're spending it on things that are superfluous. To give a second deduction for another yacht, at subsidies to the oil companies that are at a record profit. I disagree with Casey Cagle in terms of cutting Delta Airlines state-based tax credit, but not for the reasons. I mean, there's no reason that we should be giving a company that has all-time record profits a subsidy.
Yeah.
So I think if we do that, but then we got to do some hard stuff too. So we
So
got to look at
you would
entitlements.
be in favor of a balance in the budget?
I
You
would be in
vote for
favor of that. I would vote for that.
Because you know, a lot of things are gonna go away in a balanced budget, or taxes are gonna have to go up.
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. I think if we prioritize our budget, we can do some things. You start with the basics. One is we start with Social Security. It is a It is not an entitlement. It is that which people have paid into, and we stop borrowing from it, first of all. We can shore it up by making sure that we keep our promise. Set Social Security aside, then the other two things that you've got to deal with are Medicare, Medicaid, and the other social programs there. You can't do that if you, and this is what my opponent has signaled. He's signaled, and I shouldn't say just he alone, the whole caucus and the president has signaled in the 2019 released budget, proposed budget, released in February, that they intend on cutting $579 billion from Medicare and $1.5 trillion from Medicaid over the next 10 years. You don't save those programs by cutting them. Now, we came together in the 1980s, and you will probably remember this. Republicans and Democrats came together and fixed Social Security for 100 years. We did. If we had not borrowed against it like we often do right now, or use against things that people have already saved up and paid for, we wouldn't be in this shape. We can come together with a bipartisan solution to make these programs viable for the generations to come. It's one of the things that has made a solid middle class in America, which is the envy of the world.
You're right.
And my opponent said last night in the debate that Social Security wasn't something that people should be able to count on. It wasn't something that was ever designed to be anybody's retirement. He suggested we put Social Security on the stock market. Now you tell me what would have happened to America if Social Security was on the stock market in 2008.
Yeah, it was going down.
It wouldn't have been a recession, it would have been a Great Depression.
You're not in favor of increasing the deficit in the budget, excuse me, but you're in favor of doing a better job of picking our priorities and living within our means. Current tax structure.
That's what it means to grow up with being raised by people who are Depression era folks. I run a small business on Main Street, and every month I've got to balance my budget. I can't borrow against any IOU.
What do you do on Main Street?
I'm a lawyer there.
Lawyer, okay.
I'm a lawyer there. Which means I have to eat what I can kill. That's what some folks say. It's an amazing thing to be able to represent my neighbors.
Yeah.
To be able to, for them to walk in off the street and bring in a problem to you and expect you to be able to solve it.
That's right. Now, have you served in the Georgia House?
I have not.
You have not. So this is your first political.
It is. And if our districts weren't so gerrymandered in the House at the Georgia level, I might have considered running for one of those seats.
Yeah. You know, we have a farm down in your area.
Mm-hmm.
So we know about Sylvania and Stewart County and all that.
That's right. It's God's country, in my opinion.
It's beautiful.
It's a beautiful place down there.
I got another meeting that's going on. This one's running a little bit late, but you want to take over here?
Absolutely.
Let me go?
You can go whenever you like, sir.
Like you needed anyone's permission. I'm grateful for your time. Yes, sir.
See you. Good luck.
Thank you, sir.
Earlier you were talking about hospitals a few minutes ago.
Sure.
And being in Augusta, we sometimes take for granted our awesome access to
That's
health
right.
care. There are clinics and hospitals just about everywhere you turn, especially downtown. Rural areas are a lot different.
Sure.
I was surprised when you told me that Evans County Hospital is even still open.
That's right.
So what needs to be done to save rural hospitals, or at this point, can it be saved?
Well, certainly they can be saved. What needs to be done is we need to move forward and accept the money that our taxpayers have paid towards our health care. $8 million every single day. $12 billion since the passage of the Affordable Care Act. And here's the thing. The Affordable Care Act built in some ideas that were first proposed by Republicans, including Nathan Deal when he was a member of the United States House of Representatives as well, which included block grants to the states to expand their own healthcare programs. We call that Medicaid. I don't think my opponent knows the difference between Medicare and Medicaid. But Medicaid is run by the state of Georgia. And the federal government was willing for 10 years to give Georgia every penny it needed to expand its program to cover working Americans. These are people who work every day, sometimes in low-wage jobs like certified nursing assistants who take care of our seniors in nursing homes, or child care workers who take care of our young in preschools. They work every day, but they don't make enough to pay for a premium on their own, and they're not offered any insurance as a part of their compensation package through their employer. But they make too much to qualify for the subsidies under the Affordable Care Act. And so they are the folks who are not covered. If we expanded Medicaid, we could cover those folks, and that would take care of the bulk of folks who show up to the hospitals in Claxton and Metter who don't have insurance, but they certainly need services. And the problem is, when those hospitals go, it's not just the hospital, it's the critical infrastructure that goes along with it, including the human resources, the doctors and the radiologists and the pharmacies that service the hospital. Hospitals are some of the largest employers in the area, and try to go and recruit a company to come and locate a $1 million factory, multi-million-dollar factory, and bring their executives from around the world, even to a place they may love and want to come to, without basic access to emergency services. It's going to be downright impossible. First thing people want to know when they come to a community is how good are the schools and how good are the hospitals. And those are things that are on the chopping block. And get this, the time to come up with ideas is past. These folks promised that they had an idea, a better idea, they said, after the passage of the Affordable Care Act, for 6 years. That's what they said, as they voted against the Affordable Care Act, vote after vote after vote, 6 years. And then there was a whole presidential cycle where our president claimed he had a better plan, and if we elected him, he would show us. You could keep your doctor, it wouldn't discriminate against pre-existing conditions, there wouldn't be any lifetime caps, it would reduce the cost of drugs, and all of these things. And we've never seen a plan. And then he comes out and says that his plan, and my opponent has signed off on this, is to let it collapse. It's 1/5 of our economy. I guess that's easy to say when you're not relying on some insurance, or you're giving insurance as a member of the House of Representatives. But for most working people, it is a nightmare. They are in constant terror that a child is going to get sick or they're going to get sick. It's still the #1 reason people go into medical bankruptcy. And my opponent is airing a commercial right now in this market where he looks in the camera and he says, I'm going to protect Medicare. And he's already signed off on a bill, on a budget that will cut $2 trillion from Medicare and Medicaid over the next 10 years to reduce it to a little more than a coupon program. They look at these as entitlements. That's what they call them, entitlements. I look at them as promises made that are sacred. People paid into those programs, and they expect as a covenant that those programs would be along in their old age if they became disabled and the like, to protect them and keep them out of dire poverty. That's what separates America from the rest of the world, is that we developed a social safety net. And I'd be dang on if my opponent is not doing everything he can to cut every string from it.
In passing, you mentioned jobs, and you also mentioned rural areas.
Sure.
I agree with you. If you've driven through nowhere.
85 of our 159 counties have lost jobs over the last 2 years.
So what would you do, or what used to be done, and what would you do to bring jobs, more jobs to the 12th district?
Sure. Well, I mean, we've done this before. We recovered from a Great Depression because we invested in rural America. Go and look on those bridges that span our rivers and streams. And there are 3 initials on each of those bridges. WPA. There are those initials on our works, our public work projects, etc. We put America back to work by investing in rural America. We electrified rural America. We understood that rural America needed to have the same things that every other part of America had, and it made sense. And it has fueled our economies here in rural America for the last 7 years. And then we stopped investing. We promised jobs would come back, but we stopped investing. Right now, if you wanted to locate, you're from this area, I'm from this area, if I wanted to locate my multi-million-dollar global industry to Sylvania, my hometown, to employ 700-800 people, I couldn't do it. This district has a 30% gap in terms of coverage, in terms of high-speed connectivity. I couldn't speak to my other manufacturing facilities and my employees around the world because I can't keep a signal. It's hard to locate when you can't even talk to the rest of the world.
So you have driven through Millen?
Yes. So the rest of the world is moving at high speed, and we're still moving at horse and buggy pace, and that's simply not an attractive climate. Additionally, we don't have the connective tissue. Right now, if I was doing an export business and trying to get things to the port, or doing the import business and trying to manage logistics and set up a warehouse in Bullock County, where I live now, I couldn't do it. It costs more for me to put freight on a tractor trailer and bring it to Bullock than it takes for them to turn the ship around and send it all the way back to China and get another load. Our interstate systems are over capacity. There are no dedicated trucking lines. Our rail lines are fragmented and broken into pieces. No one is thinking about the big picture. No one is thinking about the real solid investments that responsible representatives have to make in order to ensure that we have growth, not just over a 2 or 3 year cycle, certainly not over a campaign cycle, but over a 10, 20, and 50 year cycle. Those are what the folks who helped to move Georgia forward were thinking about when they established, for example, the University System of Georgia school system, when they established the University of Georgia in 1785 as the first public institution. They were thinking not of themselves, but of their children and their children's children. And we rise up and call them blessed today because they sowed not for themselves, but they sowed for our reaping.
You talked about on your platform of creating a research and innovation corridor.
Sure.
Connecting Augusta and Statesboro. You know, North Carolina has the Research Triangle.
Yes.
And you're proposing something similar, connecting Augusta and Statesboro, obviously with cyber up here on this end.
Well, not just cyber, but biomedical research and innovation and design. What a wonderful set of resources we have here in Augusta to anchor that. And this area has lots of medical resources, whether it's through the VA or other private facilities, and lots of research and university resources as well. We could create an amazing corridor of learning and innovation. My opponent heard me talk about this and he's picked it up. He says we could be the Silicon Valley. He didn't listen well enough. Folks laughed because they thought we could bring Silicon Valley to know what I was suggesting was in the same way that Silicon Valley innovates for technology, we can innovate for cybersecurity and biomedical research and design.
And talk about public education for a minute.
Sure.
What direction does public education need to be going in now? And what would you do in Congress to make that movement happen?
Well, the first thing I would do is announce my intentions to be a representative who's going to champion public education. Public education. Public education, a good, high quality public education is the strongest rung on the ladder of mobility in this country. Very few of us will be in the position we are if we hadn't had access to a public education, a good public education. Now, private, parochial, charter schools all have a place in that mixture, but the bulk of American students will be educated in the public schools, and we've got to support them and make sure that teachers can get back to teaching and not necessarily be teaching to high stakes testing, and that curriculum is relevant to 21st century global economy, and that learning produces kind of critical thinking that we need for our economy and our community and the world. And so we've got to reimagine what public education looks like. I think it's got to begin before kindergarten. We've got to have universal pre-K. And we've got to also have child development centers that are standardized where a child 6 months old and their parent even can come and get wraparound services so the children aren't starting in kindergarten with a deficit. We've got to imagine what K through 12 education looks like. It's got to include tracks that lead people to STEM and technical skills and trades, as well as the college. We got to do all of those things. Where when someone graduates from our public schools, they have a plan, and they're nearly on their way to having an associate's degree in trade, or on a pathway to an associate's degree in higher education. We can do that. We don't need an 11th and 12th grade, which is basically a fun time to take pictures and go to a fancy dance. We need to reimagine, like the rest of the world has, that 11th and 12th grade moves you on towards your career path. And then post-secondary, we've got to look at reducing the burden of debt that students are graduating with. When I went to Georgia Southern, when you went to Georgia Southern, I came out with little debt. I went to law school for the same price that I'm paying for my child to go to daycare now. I want you to understand what that means. It's 30 times higher to go to school today than it was when we graduated. And wages hadn't increased by 30%. They hadn't. And so that's a burden. And students are having to finance their debt for 30 years. It is, you used to say there's no debt like your mortgage except for your student loan. You can actually shed your mortgage in a bankruptcy. You can't shed your student loan in a bankruptcy. And in a real sense, why? Think about the business model. The federal government guarantees a loan, and we give the servicing to a third party to make a profit. They make a profit if they collect. They make a profit if it defaults. But they make a profit. Why are we taking taxpayer money and loaning it to our greatest resource, which is the citizens of this country, our neighbors, and charging an interest so that a third party can make a profit? If we loaned students money for the same rate we loan banks money, then it would drive down the cost of student loans and the cost of college, and give people an opportunity to go back to Sylvania, Millen, and Waynesboro, and Swainsboro, as opposed to having to come to Atlanta, or Washington, or New York, or Charlotte to be able to earn a living. They could actually go back and pursue their dreams. You shouldn't have to choose where you live apart from where you love because you have to pay a student loan back. There should be opportunities for everyone. So my opponent is committed to going back, and his budget calls for a reduction in Pell Grants. It calls for a reduction, and I correct myself. It calls for an elimination of loan forgiveness programs. I think we should expand loan forgiveness programs to include more sectors, more industries, more occupations, and more professions. You know, we have in more than half of this district counties with one or less doctors. No pediatrician or obstetrician. Some counties in this district, I think 5, have no lawyers, no dentists. If we expanded the definition of who qualifies for loan forgiveness, then a young person coming out of medical school, coming out of pharmacy school, coming out as a dentist, may choose to relocate back to home to establish a practice in one of our smaller rural counties, as opposed to joining some mega business or mega practice group in the city. They could do that if they had the flexibility of knowing they wouldn't be shackled with debt for the rest of their life.
District 12 is a really varied district demographically.
Mm-hmm.
The wants and needs of a voter in downtown Augusta is a lot different from a voter down in Coffee County.
They see very little in common with Augusta.
What's
Folks in Dublin feel the same way.
what's the key to successfully representing such a diverse district?
Well, what you got to do is you got to show up. And my opponent has been absent from this district. Not a single town hall in 4 years of being on the taxpayers' payroll. You cannot represent people if you will not show up. And that's a start. You got to be willing to listen to people. You got to be willing to compromise towards the common good. He views compromise as a bad thing, which is the only reason why he could oppose the Affordable Care Act when 38% of this district gets their health care from 3 sources: the Children's Health Insurance Program, Medicare, and Medicaid. And he says He's opposed to those programs, supports a budget that will eliminate or reduce those programs. You're not listening. You're not listening. He believes fundamentally that people are poor because they're lazy. And he believes that government is the problem unless it's giving them a contract. I think government, as the founders envisioned it, is simply what we decide to do together that we cannot do as well by ourselves. That's what government is. It's not evil. It is the people, of, by, and for the people. It's accountable to the people. And that ultimately, we will decide what our government does. If we are okay with our government spending 56 cents out of every dollar to have a larger military than the next 10 countries put together, and we're even willing to spend even more to launch a new branch of the service to fight an extraterrestrial enemy in outer space that we haven't even identified yet. That's what the president proposes. And we're willing to do that at the exchange of better bridges, roads, and schools, a better future now for our children. That's the compromise. And people want that, then they should keep what they have. If they believe that we can reorganize our priorities and put people first, and I think they should elect a candidate who's concerned about what people think, not about what corporate interest thinks. You know, our opponent talks a lot about fiscal responsibility as a business owner. And right now his own campaign is upside down. I hadn't raised as much money as he's raised because I don't take any corporate PAC money. I think you shouldn't take money from people you have to regulate and oversee. Any other place you call it a bribe except for Congress. He's taken so much money he couldn't even keep up with it at our debate last night. But then he took out a $1.1 million loan to his own campaign for a job that pays $174,000 a year. One that he says he only wants for 2 more years, and then he'll term limit himself out. Who is he going to Washington to work for? Certainly not ordinary people.
The debate last night, y'all talked about immigration too.
We did. We also talked about his $1.1 million loan to his own campaign. If he had to cash that loan in today, his own campaign would be upside down. Who's going to pay for that loan? He doesn't have the sitting cash on hand. He has more cash on hand than I do, certainly. But he couldn't pay for that loan back. His campaign is $800,000 in debt to itself. And he wants to talk about balancing the federal budget. He should start with his own campaign. He was, according to the Cook's political report, 22 points ahead of me when we started this campaign. He spent $800,000 to lose 19 percentage points. He released his own poll to his funders saying that this was a 5-point race. I'm glad he thinks so. I think it's a lot closer than that. At least based on the early votes totals that we're getting back from real people who are showing up and casting real votes.
Now let's talk about that for a minute.
Sure.
You mentioned about the 12th district, how it was redrawn a few years ago.
4 times.
Since and it's still
Unheard of, unprecedented.
And it's still a very young district.
Yes.
It wasn't reformed until 2002.
That's right.
And it seems like every term they've redrawn it.
Yes.
And
To allow Rick Allen to pick his voters rather than the voters pick him.
Okay, so it seems like it's not very friendly to the Democrats. So with the boundaries of the district unchanged from that last election, how do you think your chances are? How do you think your chances of
People don't view me as a Democrat. They view me as a fighter. They view me as a pastor that they can trust to keep his word. They view me as a lawyer who can't be bought or bossed. They view me as an advocate. Now, they may not have agreed with every fight, but they know there's a fight in me. And I don't think Democrats have all the solutions. And I don't think everything the Republicans are proposing is bad. We need someone who will put people first, not party or president, but people first. If you send my opponent back to Congress, he will toe the line for his president and his party. And I think at the end of the day, when you start talking about the things we've talked about, those crumbling roads and bridges, those aren't red bridges or blue bridges. They're our bridges. Those hospitals aren't red or blue, they're ours. Those schools that are underperforming are not red or blue, they're ours.
You've spoken a lot about infrastructure. The transportation sales tax that Georgia authorizing, do you think that has helped at all? You may not have one around Statesboro, the T-SPLOST.
No, we don't.
Okay.
That's right.
Whole lot
No,
of
I think that
road-
that's, funding priorities at the state level around transportation is great. And I think many people could have signed on to that if they thought that it would have been more equitably distributed. I think we have to continue to push these initiatives and get the right mix of projects that voters can come out and support them. But at the federal level, we have mechanisms to fund transportation, and we fund transportation projects every year. I do think we have to cut some of the tape in terms of regulation. I do think we have to be aggressive about that. But that starts with the kind of leadership that can get that done. At the end of the day, you can review my opponent's record, and his record is replete with a mode of operation of bidding on projects low, change ordering high, and always making a profit. And that profit comes at the expense of the taxpayer. My business model is different. If I don't return something for my client, I don't get paid, period. If I don't do a good job, I won't get clients. If I don't hold true to my word and do what I say and say what I'm going to do, then I couldn't have pastored for 20 years, 19 years at one church. And so I think that's the difference between my opponent and myself. And what have you gotten for having a builder in this seat in Congress? You haven't gotten an infrastructure bill. You haven't gotten a better bridge or road or school to account for it. I think the best predictor of future behavior is past performance. He's had 4 years. He only wanted 6. Don't send someone back to Congress who spent 2/3 of the time they promised they would only be in Congress to have gotten nothing done and be shocked if the next 2 years aren't like the last 4.
You mentioned earlier that he had a 22-point lead, I guess, in Cooks, and you say that's dropped 19 points?
Well, I'm bringing a couple of threads together in terms of my analysis, but I suggest that it was at least 16 points, which is where he beat his last Democratic challenger, who actually didn't campaign at all. I don't even think she put a single sign or attended a single forum or asked for a single vote, and he beat her by 16 points. That's also what Donald Trump carried this district by as well, and that was probably the most polarized election that we've had. And so I believe we started 16 points behind. When I looked at Cook and some of the other reports, it suggested this district is 20 points more Republican than the average district. So, and then when you give the incumbency bump to that, then that takes my analysis that he is at least 22 points ahead. He has an unlimited ability to raise money and access to donors as a member of Congress. And so I tack on a little bit more for that. The only thing I have going for me, and it's certainly not the Democratic brand, because people are sick of the Democratic brand in this area too. They've heard the promises, they've heard it all before. And what I have going for me is the fact that folks know that if Francis says it, Francis means it. And that I cannot be bought or cannot be bossed by those who hold power now. And I'm not interested in those things. My interest, I feel deeply called to serve people. And I feel that through my practice of the law and through pastoring. I felt that in the classroom as I taught. I feel that calling to help people, and that's why I'm pursuing this. And if you think about it, if a black Baptist preacher who's also a civil rights lawyer, who's worked on voting rights cases over the last, and the president of the NAACP can't move the core constituencies of the Democratic Party, you might not need to have a party in this area. So we're banking on not some imaginary middle. We're banking on people who want competent leadership, who really are not sending their congressmen to Congress to wage in the partisan moral fights of the day, but who will go and represent everybody, who will go and bring back our share of resources to this area so that we can get on with the business of building a better way of life for our children and their children. You won't see me on talking shows. You will see me huddled in the corners talking to as many people as I can, Republicans and Democrats and independents and anyone who wants to talk about moving rural America forward, whether that's rural Idaho or whether that's rural Alabama or rural Georgia. This is the forgotten America. Donald Trump was right about something when he touched on, I don't think he wanted to do anything about it, but he was right. There is a forgotten America. It is rural America, and it's time to get to the business of that.
Okay, let's talk about that. That'd be a good wrap-up question. Now, you've been all around the district now, getting a feel for the sentiment of the voters. So,
Sure.
What have people in these rural areas been telling you? What are the issues that they've been bringing to you?
Well, my farmers tell me that they are absolutely disgusted that my opponent, who sits on the agriculture committee and even sat on the on the conference committee between the Senate and the House, could not secure a farm bill, and for the first time in the modern era, we don't have a farm bill. They're disgusted with that. They're disgusted that our representative did not speak up and speak against tariffs that are hurting critical farming interests in this area, whether it's soybeans or peanuts or pecans or our specialty products like blueberries and the like. They needed a congressman who will say, Mr. President, this unnecessary tax, which you call a tariff, is hurting my people, and a $12 billion welfare check doesn't even touch the economic impact that my farmers are feeling in Georgia, at least across the country. So that's what my farmers are telling me. They're telling me, don't go and make immigration a partisan issue. We respect our neighbors who've come for a better way of life. They're coming for what everyone has come for, and we need them to be able to harvest the bounty that feeds this country and the world. Don't make it more complicated. Don't push people into the shadows. We desperately need them. That's what my farmers are telling me. Then my folks in the city are saying, my opponent lives here, but we don't see him. And there are parts of Augusta that look like war zones, that are absolutely shameful in a first-class American city. And he's done nothing about it. And he lives right here. They said, don't forget about us on the south side of Augusta. Don't forget about us in downtown Augusta. Okay? And then the folks who are in places that are doing a little bit better than others, places like Swainsboro and Statesboro, they have colleges and things that sometimes give them some buffer against the worst impacts of the recession throughout the district. They're telling me, we want to lead. We want to advance. Help us at the federal level do the things that we're trying to do at the local and state level. Help us leverage what we're trying to do here with what you can do in the Congress, because we can't build dedicated trucking lines on I-16. Even working together with all the counties that touch I-16, we can't do it. The state of Georgia can't do that. That requires a federal investment. And that's something that we need a representative to do. And they're equally concerned that Mr. Allen has not given them regular consultation, has not wanted their feedback, has not held a single town hall. And so if folks want someone who's going to D.C. to promote their economic prosperity, not his, but their economic prosperity, all of our economic prosperity, someone who will go and defend their civil liberties, then they should elect Francys Johnson. If they want someone who's going to do the corporate bidding of those who paid for his seat in Congress, they should stick with my opponent. I don't think the case could be any more clearer. The difference is any more stark between Mr. Allen. Mr. Allen views a country and a democracy based on subtraction and division, which is why he tries to divide people by race and class and all of these things. I think America is at its best when we build a democracy based on addition. And that's why I can look at the Constitution and know that when it was promulgated in 1787, it did not include me. Not in the full bounty of its promises, but through work, sometimes through fights, and even war, we have made this a more perfect union. That is the genius of America. That is why it is still a bright light to the world. And that's why people fight so hard to get here, so that they can be called an American, not by blood or not by tribe, but by an ideal. That's how we're bound in this country, and we intend to keep it so.
Francys Johnson, candidate for Congress, thank you very much.
Thank you.